We are talking about competition in school music. Is it good? Is it bad? What are the implications for the future? On today's PMEA's Take Note podcast.
Well, everybody, and welcome to this edition of PMEA's Take Note podcast. I'm Mark Despadagas. Glad you're with us today. Today we're talking about competition in school music. We're excited to have with us Dr. Sean Powell. He is chair of the Division of Music Education at the University of North Texas and is the author of the book, The Ideology of Competition in School Music. Sean, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Mark. So great to be here.
So before we get into the book and we talk about the content of the book, I always like to have guests kind of tell us about themselves. So, give us your background, kind of maybe your elevator speech, if you will, so we're a little familiar with you.
Yeah, I'm in my 11th year here at the University of North Texas. I'm a professor of music education. I began here teaching courses for undergraduates like band methods and things like that. Nowadays, as chair of the division, I teach mostly graduate courses. Before I was here at UNT, I spent 6 years at Columbus State University in Georgia at the Schroeb School of Music. Before that, I got my doctorate in music ed at the University of Illinois. And prior to my graduate school time, I was a band director in the public schools of Tennessee. And I'm a saxophonist. Or at least I was at one time.
Right. Oh, all right. So the band director piece is certainly important for your expertise on the topic we're talking about today. So let's have you. I mentioned you're the author of this book, The Ideology of Competition in School Music, which is what we're mainly here to discuss. And if you for viewers and listeners, if you have not seen the book, I recommend you checking it out. I've seen it going around in some music educator circles, which is what drew me to it and to have Sean on. So let's start out with, if you could lay out what's the general principle of the book and kind of what your conclusion is about competition in school music.
Yeah. Great question. So hard to sum up very concisely and make sense, but I'm going to try. So throughout my entire career as in music education, starting from when I was a band student in junior high, starting saxophone, all the way through high school, all the way through college, and then when I became a music teacher myself, and then now as someone who teaches pre-service teachers who will go out, and my students go out and are teachers themselves in the school. The one common thread throughout all those experiences I've had, from a student, a teacher, and now a teacher of teachers, has been that competition has been the primary structuring and motivational and evaluation force in school music and in anywhere that I've experienced it. So I've taught in some capacity in Tennessee, Illinois, Georgia, and Texas. So I've been to several different states. I know friends that teach in other states beyond those. And I think the one element that we see is that competition has become not just something that is part of music education, where we do music education and then sometimes we compete, but is in many places the primary structure. And what I mean by that is, when I was a high school band director, I spent all summer getting ready for the marching season because we had marching band competitions. And I knew that how we did in those competitions was how I was going to be evaluated as a teacher. By my principal, by my parents, by the students, by the community, by the superintendent. But once the marching season was over and the competitions were over, then I was looking forward to the spring with the concert band festival. And I knew that, based on if we got a 1 or 2 or 3, whatever it was, that score was going to define how I was perceived by those same stakeholders. And, we had state standards for music. And I was observed sometimes by principals. And they usually came in, they didn't really know much about music, and they just saw that we were doing things in class and the students were behaving and the sounds seemed pretty good. And so they're like, hey, this looks great. But the thing that really mattered was that score that our groups got. And then for my students, they were, and I was this way as a student myself. I was, if I wasn't thinking about the ensemble level competition, I was thinking about, am I going to get first chair? Am I going to make the regional band or the all-state band? Am I going to get a one at solo on ensemble? And those are the things that drove me to practice. And when I went into lessons, I remember this incident very clearly. I went into a saxophone lesson once with my teacher, and he was working on some tonal concepts and, just the basic fundamentals of playing. And I remember telling him, hey, this is cool, but I've got to play this required etude next week for mid-state band. So can we just get back to that? And he didn't really receive that very well. So now I see that in my students here, when they graduate, they may have these things about, oh, I want to develop comprehensive musicianship, or I want to offer music classes that everyone in the school can take and not just a small percentage of the school population. And they have these idealistic kind of thoughts about the kind of teacher they want to be. But once they get out, and I've done some empirical research on this too, once they get out into the schools, they have to just plug into that system, because that's the reward and punishment system that we've set up. That's our standardized test. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, as we go today. So anyway, try to make this short. The book is my thinking and reflecting on this issue. No one's really written a book scale study on something that seems to be very pervasive in many places that structures our music education system, yet not too many folks in the field have really taken a look at it, questioned it, and asked whether, is this the best way to do things? Maybe would another approach be better? Is this really educational? Is this taking structures from other things in our society, such as athletics, such as our economy, and imposing them on an artistic form, and sort of taking away the artistic expression part of it and adding in more of the production, final product, score and assessment piece? And I'm sure we can get into that in more detail. But anyway, that's about as short as I can go about this. It just comes from my own experience as a student and a teacher, and wanting to just examine this and ask the questions that I think need to be asked.
So let's go into some detail then.
Yeah.
When I have talked to people who are all about competition or see the value in it, one of the things that I've traditionally heard is, well, we're in a competitive society. Everything we do is competing. You're competing to find a job. You're competing to find a date. We live in the world of sports. Students are competing to get into degree programs in music education, and then into a graduate program or a doctoral program. So their argument then is there not value in teaching what that is like and what goes into the final product, that we have to put all of these things into working toward a final product because we are looking for an outcome, and we are teaching that through music in this case. Valid argument or not?
Oh, I think that's a very common argument that a lot of very smart, reasonable people make. Hear it all the time. So here's my response. My response comes from the premise that you set up this question with, which is, hey, everything in our society is competitive. The job market, you mentioned the dating market, which that's true these days, especially. Music is competitive. I mean, everything is, right? So my response would be, students are going to be competitive and going to have to be competitive and are going to learn to be competitive, whether they're in our music class or not, because that's just, as you just beautifully laid out, that's the world we live in. It's everywhere. I don't think we as music teachers, it's on our shoulders to teach them to be competitive. And if we don't, they'll just never learn. They'll just be afloat in the world. I don't think that's the case, because literally it's everywhere. And so just by life experience, students are going to be forced to be competitive in many aspects of their lives. I don't think that is necessarily good, but I think that is the reality and realistic. But because it's so ubiquitous, I think that means it's not necessary for us to teach a student to be competitive. I think it's just going to happen. But let me address another part of that question, which is, so Freud has something called the reality principle. I'm not going to get too theoretical here, but I think this is useful. And then the theorist Marcuse from the Frankfurt School kind of developed the reality principle into something called the performance principle. And what these guys are getting at is that we tend to remain trapped in the immediate concrete reality that we see around us, and we conflate the way things are with the way things that they could be, and that oftentimes our imaginations stop where things currently exist, and we have a hard time imagining how things might be different, how things could work in another way. In this case, we just say, well, the whole world's competitive. We might as well just be competitive because that's the way of the world. And what are we going to do? Right. But, and many scholars have written about this over years. I mean, you can go from Plato to today. The arts can be one of the places where we can maybe develop our imaginations to think about how things could be different than the way they are. Maybe one of the only places left that's possible. The arts can be about expression, about developing our subjectivity in our felt life. They can be about either literally imagining a world that could be different, like in literature or in poetry or in drama, or it could be, if not literally imagining a concrete world differently than the one we have, it can be about not being tied to this world at all, at least momentarily, while we're in the process of making art, such as music. However, I think what we've done is we have allowed art in schools, including music, to be captured by the reality principle and say, there's no use imagining a different world or thinking creatively or pulling away from this very cutthroat economic model of competition where we're all each other's throats all the time trying to gain an advantage. And we can maybe take an hour out of our day, that's our art classroom, our music classroom, and pull out of that and not have to be in the world, as you just said, is everywhere else outside of those walls. And I also think about Michael Apple, the sociologist of education, who used to think that schools are a problem because schools just replicate society, and schools exist to just recreate the conditions of the outside world. And he later came to think, no, schools can be sites of replication, but they can be sites of change too. And they can be sites where you're putting food at the table at the end of the day is not at stake, maybe on a Tuesday at school. And if we did school the way he envisions, we might have space to imagine and create and think about different ways that the world might work. And so I would say, yeah, the world is really competitive, and it's going to happen, and our students are going to be caught in that competitive system, whether they want to or not. But one, I don't think it's the music teacher's job to teach them because they're going to have to learn anyway. That's just through the course of life. Two, I think arts are a way that we can pull out of that and think freely without having to be in those very rigid confines. And then if we allow arts to be just like every other subject that has a standardized test that's measured and everybody's ranked and compared against each other, then I think we forfeited what the arts bring to us. And we no longer have the benefit of the arts, and band just becomes just like the football team or just like the debate team, and the artistic advantage that we always like to say in our advocacy materials that music is a unique contribution to a kid's life. But I think if we let it be trapped within that kind of economic competition, we've forfeited that piece. And so that's how I would respond to that question. And it's a great question, so thank you.
So let's zoom in a little bit then on the music classroom. Let's just use an example of, we'll say, 7th period band class, right? We've all been there. Okay, so let's say we'll do a hypothetical. We're at ABC High School, and they do not subscribe or do any competitive structures. They don't go to band competitions. They don't do ratings. The goal is just music education there, and we're for the benefit of the students.
Mm-hmm.
So let's even put in the hypothetical that we take out the structure of first chair, second chair, third chair. And we have done a great job of explaining that the first clarinet, second clarinet part, and third clarinet part are all valuable to the piece of music we're playing. That doesn't mean that you're better, although in the non-hypothetical world, generally the better player is on the first part. But say we've taken all of those pieces of the puzzle away. I would think that no matter what, the goal is to learn to play as an ensemble. One of the goals is to learn to play as an ensemble, and for that ensemble to get better over time. So I've heard a lot of people say, our goal is not to beat the other band. Our goal is to beat ourselves. Our goal is to get better. And you referenced that in the book at one point as well.
Yeah.
So in the hypothetical, I guess my question then is, how is that also not competition? That even if we don't say we're trying to beat ourselves, we still want to be better. The goal is to keep getting better at any skill that we do. And there are skills in music, of course, as creative as well. But how is that not competition? How do you pull is there a way to pull that way of thinking out of the ensemble needs to get better? Is that not competition?
Yeah, great question. I think it's really, so I try to do this in the book too, and I'll try to do it now, which is sort of narrow the target in my critique. So I think that, I spent a lot of time in the first chapter saying that I'm actually a very competitive person, and I like competition in many contexts. I'm a really big sports fan.
I note the Chicago Cubs baseball behind you. Yes.
There it is. Yeah. Cubs. They're sitting at home watching the playoffs just like I am. So not a great season for the Cubs. We're used to it. Yeah, I'm a huge sports fan. I think if you and I played trivia, you may not have a lot of fun because I'm super competitive. I may turn the table over if I lose. My son just finished his baseball season, and like I had to restrain myself from like screaming, and he's 8. I mean, it's crazy, right? So my target is not competition. Like I like the British Baking Show, and they do it in a very sweet way, but I think it's fun, right? But here's the issue, and here's what I'm really talking about. Competition has become and I said this at the beginning of our talk. It has become not just something that we have music ed and then we do some competitions, and that's a thing we do. In many places, it's become the way we evaluate our jobs and how we're doing. If a teacher, if you want to know who's the better band director or choir director or orchestra, whoever, you just look at their contest scores, and the teacher who got the 95 is better teacher than the one who got the 87. You don't know. And in Texas, we post the scores publicly on our website. You can go look at anybody's scores any teachers. And those are used in job interviews and searches. Those are real stakes, right? And there's no context, though. What was the socioeconomic means of this school versus this one? How many paid staff did this school have? How much did the boosters raise at this school? What are the percentage of students who have to work after school in this school versus this one? What's the level of instruments that parents buy for their kids or that school can provide in this school versus none of that context is there. It's just the two numbers. And this teacher is better than this one because the score is higher. So taking competition as a substitute because it's easy, fast, the system's already in place, as a substitute for real educational evaluation is really the thing that is my main target. And also things that place students in hierarchies. So, if this program got rid of, chair test, I think that's pretty cool. It doesn't mean that the teacher is not responsible to put kids on the parts that work for them at their skill level and their developmental level, right? If you can't cross the break very well, probably shouldn't play first clarinet. But that doesn't mean we have to put a sheet up. And I did this as a teacher, right? So I've been there. Put the sheet up with the names in order. And why did I do that? Because that's how I experienced it. So I just replicated the thing that I did. I didn't think about it at all. I didn't ask the question at all of should I do this or not. It was just a given that I was going to do it because that was my experience, right? So I think human beings are going to always have a natural tendency to compare and imitate. It's, if you're playing trumpet and that trumpeter can hit a higher note than you and it's got a clearer tone, you're going to say, oh, wow, that trumpeter's better than me. But either I resent that person, I'm mad, or I'd love to work and practice so I can get as good as that trumpeter. I think that is just natural human comparison and imitation that is going to be there and can be really positive if done in the right way, But what I am concerned about is all this complex process of teaching and learning that takes place in this very complex, dynamic, socio-cultural environment is sort of reduced to just whatever number you got at a competition. Or how many students do you have in All-State this year, which is a metric a lot of principals use too. What was the context? How many students do you have this year? Or who had the means to have lessons? All these things that are messy and hard and take time to evaluate. It's just easier just to look at the bottom line, right? And the problem is the rewards and punishments on either side are so great that your focus, I think, and this happened to me for sure, becomes what I call one-dimensional, right? You may have the desire to do these other things with your program, but you have to focus on that next score coming up because that's what's going to be, even if it's not formal, even if it's not like, well, if I don't get an 80, I'm going to get fired. Even if it's not at that level, if you don't get the place you are expecting or the score you're expecting, you can have a lot of pressure from students, from parents, disappointment. Hey, I thought you were a good teacher, but why aren't we doing as well as our neighboring school? And actually, the Facebook group Band Directors, just in the last couple of weeks, has had many, many posts about people saying, oh, we got first place in all these categories, but in one category we got second place, and my students wanted to have a meeting because they're so disappointed. It's like, that sounds like a pretty good placement to me. But even people who do really well, the stakes are so high and the expectations are raised so much that, and this director's saying, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, or I've worked really hard, but second place isn't good enough. And I have people send me these posts all the time just saying, hey, I think you find this interesting. So, yeah, I just think there's a difference between that and Timmy wants to sound like Susie because she sounds a little better than him. I think that's just part of any endeavor that human beings are part of. But what I don't want to do is take that element and then put it at the top and make it like the primary reason we're doing all this, right?
So you hit a little bit on the community piece and how that's viewed. So I see. Well, so let's take this before I say that. In many communities, right, and you're in Texas, you get this: football is king, high school football is king. So it's a big deal for a community, regardless of if you graduated from that high school 30 years ago, or you graduated last year, or you're still there. When your high school football team does well, there's a community rallying point. There's a community pride that is associated with that. There's a pride for you with the Cubs, even when they're not winning, right? Like you're attached to that.
Yeah.
You're attached to that team.
Yeah.
So that I've seen that happen then with the high school marching band, we'll say, because that is the most competitive. So there, in many places, the culture then has been created, because we can say the same thing for football. The culture has been created over time to get us to that point. The culture would have been created then to get that, oh, we're going to rally behind the marching band. This is a great thing that's happening for our school, and it's part now of our school and community culture. If we win, great. If we're close to winning, great too. But it's part of the community culture. So is that not then a positive of competing?
Yeah. So I think this is a good question. So I recount this, I think, in my book, but I think this is worth repeating here. So I've asked students, a lot of groups of students, sometimes freshman students, sometimes graduate students who've had careers as teachers already. And I say, hey, what would happen if we woke up tomorrow morning and all of the competitive systems that we built are just gone? So in Texas, we have UIL, which is sort of our state-run competitive organization, and they handle sports plus music plus any competition between schools, or the marching band championship circuit is gone. So it's all gone, and so there's nothing. And everyone says you don't have to compete anymore. I know this isn't going to happen, but it's hypothetical. And you can do whatever you want. No pressure, no obligation. And most of the time, after a discussion, the students say, well, if that happened, by the afternoon, we would have come up with a new one to replace it. And I think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that competition systems are just what we do. We've done it for generations now. When I became a teacher, I didn't think, oh, now I'm a band director. I need to decide if I'm going to go to marching band competitions or not. That wasn't a decision I even considered. That was something that I could think about. It didn't even enter my brain that was like one of the things I had to decide. It was already decided because that's what you do, right? It's like a football coach saying, I wonder if we're going to play games this year. Makes no sense, right? However, I think that the issue is, back to the arts thing, we've taken a form in schools that, if you look at all of our advocacy materials and you look at the national standards and your state standards and what people say about music, they're always talking about self-expression. And this is the one place in school where there's no standardized test and kids can learn to be themselves and bring out who they are, all these things that you hear all the time. But then we treat it just like the football team. And I think, there was a local director here when I moved to Texas, and I was talking to him about this, and one of the most highly successful programs in the whole country. And he said, here's what I think happened. Football has been around. It's been a big deal, source of community pride, as he said, or community shame. Let's not forget that. Anything that can be a source of community pride can be also a source of community frustration and anger at the same time, right? That's the other side. For every one winner, there's hundreds of losers, right? But so you get teams together on Friday night and they play each other. And then at halftime, they let the bands go play. Well, the parents and the students and everyone else starts to naturally compare the bands to each other and say, wait a minute, why does the visiting team's band, why are they bigger? Why are they louder? Why does their drill look more, whatever it is? Hey, band director, why can't we look like that? And so the band director goes, okay, I hear you. I got some pressure from the community. I better like not embarrass us in front of the visitors. So the halftime starts to be just as competitive as the rest of the game. And the parents that are the parents of the band kids go, well, my kid's going to be on the best band. And so we're going to fundraise and we're going to like pump a lot of money into this and have boosters, just like the football team has boosters. And it just ramps up from there. And then what we see is, hey, if you're successful in this and you bring home the trophy to your school district, you get lots of rewards and you get praise from your colleagues and from your community. And you might get a very nice supplement for all the after school time that you need to put into it, but it's worth it to the district to pay you that supplement because they want that winning group. So the motivations to do this are extremely high. And winning, of course, feels amazing and great. It feels great. Not winning, even like I've recounted that story, even second place can feel really bad sometimes, right? So I think we can't just focus on all those that are winning all the time. We got to think about those that aren't. But I would also say this, that if our focus is on that score and bringing home that trophy, then our agency as teachers about what kind of music we can teach, what we want to do with our time, the learning goals we have for our students are out of our hands now. Because with competition coming up in 2 weeks, where the stakes being that high, all we can think about is doing what we have to do to be successful in 2 weeks. If I'm a teacher that decides, you know what I would really like to be doing right now, what I think my students would learn the best from, or what they need at this moment, is to teach a unit on improvisation, or teach them, or do chamber music, whatever it is, or have students compose. I would love to do that, but it is not my decision now because I have a competition in 2 weeks. And then when those are over, there'll be another one across the board. So my entire project here is about teacher agency and professional educators being able to educate the students in their classrooms in the way that they feel is appropriate for their education, because we are supposed to be a class in school for credit. And we always tell people that music is part of a well-rounded education, right? So if that's true, the educator in that room should be able to make the decisions about what we're teaching, what we're working on, not beholden to the calendar of the competitive system. So yes, of course it feels great to win. And of course it's a source of community pride, but I just think there are other ways for us to do that. And will it be easy? No, because I think if we said there's no competitive system, most teachers would go right back and try to create it. So it's not just about dismantling competition. It's about working together to think about how we can put the decision-making power into the teacher with their students in the classroom versus it being dictated by this centralized structure that everyone seems to be beholden to.
So you've laid out the arguments, you've backed them up for sure. Let's kind of bring this full circle then. So what's the fix? It's obviously this is the big societal cultural change. I mean, have you thought through then what the fix can be to this in music education?
Yeah. So this is an answer that a lot of people just don't find satisfactory, but it's the honest one. So one of the primary things that I have as a critique of the competitive structure is that it's standardized, okay, and it's homogenized. And so it doesn't matter where your community is located or what its sociocultural background is, what its economic means are. When you go to that marching band show, for example, you are going to be scored on the same rubric by the same judges compared to the other groups on the same level. And it's a standardized test. I mean, music teachers, I often hear them say, like, I'm so glad I don't teach a standardized test subject, but you do if you're doing this as your main means of evaluation, because it's literally standardized, right? It's a standardized rubric. It has to be in order to compare people on the same level. So if that is one of my critiques, is the standardization and homogenization of music education because of the demands of competition, then what I can't do is say, well, instead of doing this standardized, homogenized system, let's replace it with this other standardized homogenized system, because then you have all those things all over again with a different name. So I mentioned this a little bit in my previous answer, but what I see as the optimal situation is that music educators in their communities with their students in a singular way have the agency, the decision-making power as professional educators to know what their students need and to be able to develop that. Now, no one does that in a vacuum. There's community standards, there are learning benchmarks from the district, and all those contexts are different. And that may differ year to year, even in the same location, right? But I want to put that decision-making power in the hands of the professionals in the classroom, some of which may decide to go to competitions. It's not the decision I would make, but some might. But I think a lot of others, and I know this is true because I get messages from teachers all the time that said, I've been looking for a way to think about this because for years I've been not wanting to do this, and I feel trapped in this system. So I think the unsatisfying answer is that to get there, we have to have a critical mass of people that band together, that talk about these issues and aren't afraid to bring up these hard questions, that can debate openly without fear of being thought of as someone who wants to just opt out because they're not good enough to score well. Okay, because that's a pressure. I felt that too. But that, if you are a singular solitary band director in a school that has been in a competitive system, you can't just, tomorrow morning go and say, hey guys, we're just stopping. That isn't going to work. That's not realistic. That's not going to be something that you have the power to do. But if many teachers who are colleagues with each other have a show of solidarity and can, get their ducks in a row through discussion and debate and propose something that works for them in their schools, or, comes up with some reasons why they want to make this shift that works for policymakers, then I think that would be the approach. So I don't expect anyone to read my book and just say, well, I'm starting next week, we're just going to quit going to competitions. I don't think that's not what I'm trying to argue for. What I'm trying to argue for is having the conversation started so teachers in their own classrooms can make their own decisions. And so school A and school B down the road can look very, very different and have very different things going on and different musical outcomes. Still with standards, still with the district learning goals and real teacher evaluation, not the score, but actual authentic people going to watch teaching, giving feedback, helping young teachers grow and learn. And part of the network we have in competition is already sort of a built-in way that we could have this networking with mentors, which I think would be really useful. But anyway, so I know it would be much satisfying if I said, here's my 5-step plan for music ed, but to have a 5-step plan that works for everybody would be sort of against the ethos that I'm trying to propagate. So happy to answer a follow-up on that, but I think that's as far as I probably will go.
No, I think you've laid it out well, and you kind of make that argument in the book too. I mean, there is no simple solution. That's why I pressed you to think. I thought, well, maybe you've come up with one since you wrote the book, but that's okay. I get you make a valid point that is not possible. So I will highly recommend this book to people, and anyone who's listened to this podcast with any regularity knows that I'm all about competitive marching band. So for me to recommend reading this book, I think that maybe that comes a little bit of weight to it. So the book again is called The Ideology of Competition in School Music. Dr. Sean Powell, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. So happy to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
And thank you all for joining us on this edition of PMEA's Take Note podcast. We want to thank our sponsors, the Grove City College Department of Music and Zezwitz Music. We will see you next time.